Do you have a loved one who went missing or was murdered while traveling abroad? Is your family still searching for answers? At the Last Trip podcast, we believe these stories deserve to be heard. We want to amplify your voice, share your loved one's story, and help bring awareness to their case. If you are a family member or friend of someone who vanished or lost their life while traveling, we want to hear from you. Your story could help spark new leads, keep their memory alive, and push for the justice they deserve. Reach out to us at thelasttrippodcast@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at thelasttrippcrimepod to share your story. Together, we can shine a light where it's needed most. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. If you haven't already done so, please make sure the volume of this podcast is set perfectly to your listening enjoyment. Please take your seat, whether that's on the treadmill, car, sofa, or bed, and buckle in for the last trip. My name is Jamie Beebe, and I'll be your tour guide, recreating someone's last days in paradise. On behalf of myself and everyone behind the scenes, please enjoy the Last Trip podcast. And because nobody likes a long flight to get to where they want to be, let's prepare for takeoff. A lush ancient jungle, the ruins of a lost civilization, and a man who vanished without a trace. One moment, 66-year-old Raymond Ashcroft was walking through the legendary ruins of Tikal, a UNESCO World Heritage Site deep in the Guatemalan rainforest. The next, he was gone. No struggle, no witnesses, just silence. Authorities launched a desperate search within a half hour of his disappearance. But Raymond? He had disappeared into the shadows of history, just like the ancient Maya who once ruled these lands. Was it an accident? Did he wander off and couldn't find his way back? Was it foul play? Or something far stranger? Today, on the last trip, we're heading deep into the mystery of Raymond Ashcroft, an American tourist who walked into the jungle and never walked out. What really happened that day? And where is Raymond Ashcroft? To understand the mystery of Raymond Ashcroft's disappearance, we must first understand the setting. The breathtaking yet unforgiving landscape of Tikal National Park, the heart of northern Guatemala's Petén province. It's a place where ancient history meets wild, untamed jungle, drawing thousands of tourists every year. But it's also a place where nature reigns supreme, where the dense rainforest can swallow a person in seconds, and where answers, like Raymond himself, can disappear into the shadows. Tikal National Park is one of the most famous archaeological and ecological sites in the world, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It protects not just one of the most significant ruins of the ancient Mayan civilization, but also an expansive and biodiverse rainforest. The park covers 222 square miles, a vast, sprawling expanse of jungle, filled with towering ceiba trees, thick vines, and hidden paths that seem to go on forever. For centuries, the temples and pyramids of Tikal were lost beneath this dense canopy, only rediscovered by explorers in the 19th century. Even today, much of Tikal remains unexcavated, its secrets still buried beneath the jungle floor. The park is more than just ruins. It's an oasis for wildlife. The jungle teems with life: howler monkeys, spider monkeys, toucans and parrots, crocodiles, and jaguars. It's a place of adventure, beauty, history, and danger. People come to Tikal from all over the world, drawn by its fascinating mix of history, archaeology, and nature. Walking through the park feels like stepping back in time into the heart of the Mayan world. There are plenty of attractions that bring visitors to the area. The Temple IV is the tallest structure in Tikal, standing 230 feet and offering breathtaking panoramic views of the jungle, stretching to the horizon. The Lost World Pyramid is one of the oldest structures in Tikal, dating back to 700 BDC, part of an astronomical complex used by the Maya to track celestial movements. Tikal is also one of the best places in Central America for birdwatching, with over 400 species of birds, including toucans, motmots, and the elusive orange-breasted falcon. Some visitors climb to the top of the pyramids at dawn or dusk to experience the jungle coming to life in the soft glow of the rising or setting sun. For many, a visit to Tikal is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a chance to walk among ancient ruins, to hear the calls of distant howler monkeys, and to feel the weight of history pressing in from all sides. This was the world Raymond Ashcroft stepped into on that fateful last trip. Raymond and his wife, Van Phuong, were staying at the Jungle Lodge, one of the most well-known accommodations in Tikal National Park. Built in 1956, the Jungle Lodge was originally constructed to house archaeologists working to uncover Tikal's secrets. Today, it functions as an eco-lodge, offering tourists a comfortable but immersive experience in the heart of the jungle. The lodge isn't a luxury resort. It's designed for travelers who want to feel connected to nature. That means rustic rooms, occasional power outages, and the sounds of the jungle creeping in at night. But it's also not an isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere. The Jungle Lodge is a well-visited, well-maintained hotel located near the entrance to the park, with staff, other tourists, and guides coming and going all day long. Somehow, Raymond vanished just steps away from the entrance of the Jungle Lodge. And the couple wasn't traveling alone. They booked their tour through Eagle Eye Tours, a well-established Canadian tour company specializing in wildlife excursions worldwide. The trip was carefully planned, with an emphasis on birdwatching, one of the biggest draws for nature enthusiasts visiting Tikal. The Eagle Eye Tour Group included expert guides, leading guests through the park's main trails and hidden paths, helping them spot rare species along the way. The Jungle Lodge, the entrance to Tikal, the surrounding area, this was not a place where someone should simply vanish without a trace. It wasn't deep in the jungle. It wasn't an isolated stretch of wilderness. It was right outside a hotel. Raymond Ashcroft wasn't just some name in a news report. He was a husband, a traveler, a person with a rich and complicated life. And the more you learn about him, the more impossible his disappearance seems. Raymond was 66 years old when he vanished, but his story began decades earlier in Houston, Texas, where he built a life alongside the love of his life, Van Phuong. They met while working as pharmacists at a prestigious cancer hospital, a place filled with both hope and heartbreak. They spent their early years together caring for patients, making life-saving decisions, and leaning on each other through the emotional weight of their work. It was in that environment that they formed an unshakable bond, one built on love, trust, and deep understanding that only comes from seeing the best and worst of life side by side. Raymond and Van weren't just co-workers or even just husband and wife. They were true partners. Over the next 40 years, they built a life of adventure, discovery, and shared experiences. They loved to travel, exploring the world not just as tourists, but as people who truly wanted to know a place, to experience its history, its people, its culture. When they arrived in Guatemala in early 2023, it was meant to be another beautiful chapter in their lifelong journey together. But Raymond wasn't the kind of traveler who could just set off on his own. He had his struggles, and Van knew him better than anyone. She knew he needed her. Raymond suffered from mental health challenges, including memory issues and episodes of mania. His mind was always restless, always moving, searching for stimulation. He wasn't someone who could just sit quietly and wait. His thoughts would race, and he needed something to focus on. The only thing that seemed to settle him, even for a little while, was a card game Van had downloaded on her phone. It was their little ritual, something that kept him engaged and gave him a sense of calm. Physically, he had his limitations as well. He had a bad left knee, which made walking difficult. He moved slowly, carefully, always aware of the pain that came with each step. He couldn't go more than 500 steps without stopping to rest, meaning he couldn't walk too far, certainly not far enough to just vanish into the dense Guatemalan jungle. So when people say maybe he wandered off, it just doesn't add up. This wasn't a man who would, or could, just disappear. He relied on Van, not just for emotional support, but for practical everyday things. He needed her to help him keep his mind engaged, to help him navigate their trips, to keep him moving at a comfortable pace. And she never would have left him alone if she thought, even for a second, that something could go wrong. Yet, on February 3rd, 2023, in the ancient ruins of Tikal, a place filled with thousands of years of history, where civilizations had risen and fallen, where secrets had been buried beneath dense jungle canopies, Raymond Ashcroft was there one moment and gone the next. What happened that day? How does a man who struggles with memory, who physically cannot walk far, who needs constant engagement and support, how does that man disappear without a trace? The official story suggests he simply wandered off. But if you knew Raymond, if you understood his mind, his body, his limits, you'd know that explanation doesn't make sense. And when we break down the timeline of his last known moments, the questions only get stranger. The morning of February 3rd, 2023, started like any other day on the tour. Raymond Ashcroft and his wife Van set out on foot with their group, led by two guides from Eagle Eye Tours, a Canadian company known for its wildlife excursions around the world. This was an 11-day adventure through Belize and Tikal, a $4,075 per-person trip promising breathtaking sights and unforgettable experiences. The couple had spent the morning walking through the vast expanse of Tikal National Park, one of the most awe-inspiring archaeological sites in the world. But their focus wasn't on the ruins that morning. It was on birds. With binoculars in hand, they followed the main and side paths of the park, scanning the towering ceiba trees and thick jungle canopy, hoping to catch glimpses of the rare and exotic species that called Tikal home. For some, it was a peaceful, almost meditative experience. Just the crunch of leaves underfoot, the whisper of the wind, and the occasional excited whisper when someone spotted something rare through the trees. By noon, the group was making their way back toward the Jungle Lodge, the hotel where they were staying. After a long morning on their feet, the promise of lunch and a break from the heat was more than welcome. But then, something caught the group's attention. A crocodile, resting lazily on the banks of a pond right in front of the hotel entrance. A tiger heron stood nearby, completing the perfect wildlife scene. The group stopped, eager to capture the moment. Cameras clicked, voices hushed in excitement. But Raymond? He wasn't interested. He turned away from the group and said he was heading back to the hotel. Van didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he just needed to use the bathroom or was tired and wanted to sit down before lunch. She knew he moved slowly, painfully so, with his bad left knee, so she figured she'd catch up with him in a few minutes. But that was the last time anyone ever saw him. Because when Van reached the hotel, Raymond was nowhere to be found. She expected to see him sitting in the lobby or waiting near their room, but he wasn't there. She checked the obvious places first. The lobby, empty. The bathrooms behind the restaurant, nothing. Room 31, their room, no sign of him. Raymond couldn't have gotten far, not with his knee, not in the short amount of time since she last saw him. Something was not right. By 12:30 p.m., less than 30 minutes after Raymond had walked away from the group, Van told the guides he was missing. The search began immediately. Hotel guards and two of the birdwatching tour members spread out, one even taking off on a motorbike to cover more ground. When they found nothing outside the park, the search moved inward. 5 men entered Tikal's dense jungle, splitting up to search different paths, calling Raymond's name, scanning the foliage for any sign of him. Time was slipping away. By 2 p.m., after 2 hours with no sign of Raymond, authorities were contacted. Police, agents from the Tourist Civil Authority, and Guatemalan soldiers were sent in to assist. The search intensified. By 5 p.m., the United States Embassy had been notified, and the Guatemalan Ministry of the Interior was brought in. Soon after, investigators arrived to question Van and others at the hotel. Was Raymond showing any signs of distress that morning? Had anything unusual happened? Had anyone seen him leave the area? By 6:30 the next morning, the search had expanded dramatically. 97 people, including police, firefighters, and soldiers, were combing the park, covering every trail, searching every possible hiding place. Search and rescue teams brought in dogs trained to track human scent. But they found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no personal belongings, nothing. It was as if Raymond had simply vanished. With no physical evidence, authorities turned to technology. They reviewed CCTV footage around the park, hoping to catch sight of him. They pulled records from telephone companies and the Guatemalan Institute of Migration, checking if somehow, against all logic, Raymond managed to leave the park. They checked border crossings, questioning whether Raymond, in a moment of confusion, could have left the country altogether. Still, nothing. Days passed, then weeks. The jungle was searched again and again. Guatemalan authorities deployed a surveillance team to sweep the national park daily, with support of the National Civil Police, the Guatemalan Army, and the National Coordination for Disaster Reduction. Still, no Raymond. With every passing day, the search grew more desperate. Authorities reached out to Interpol, who issued a yellow notice, a global police alert for missing persons, typically reserved for cases of parental abductions, criminal kidnappings, or unexplained disappearances. This meant law enforcement agencies worldwide would be on the lookout for Raymond in case he turned up in another country, confused or unable to identify himself. Weeks turned to months. Investigators searched a 16-kilometer radius from where he was last seen, covering every possible path, every potential route he could have taken. No footprints, no clues, no witnesses, no evidence of where he went or what happened to him. Now, this isn't a case where someone walked off into the jungle and got lost. This is a man who physically could not walk far, who struggled with memory issues, who relied on his wife to help him stay oriented. How does someone like that disappear in a matter of minutes, just steps away from a hotel? If Raymond had simply gotten turned around, wouldn't he have been found by now? If he had wandered too far, wouldn't search teams have picked up some kind of evidence? Where is Raymond Ashcroft? And more importantly, what happened to him? Only one thing is certain. Raymond Ashcroft did not simply vanish into thin air. Yet, despite an intensive investigation, not a single clue has surfaced. No footprints, no discarded belongings, no sightings, no clear answer. So what did happen to Raymond? One of the first and most obvious theories is that Raymond somehow became disoriented and wandered deep into the vast jungle surrounding Tikal National Park. Now, on the surface, that makes sense. Tikal is a sprawling, dense, and often unforgiving environment. The park spans over 222 square miles, filled with twisting paths, towering ruins, and thick vegetation that can easily disorient even experienced hikers. But does this theory really hold up? Raymond was not an average traveler. He had serious mobility issues. His left knee was bad enough that he couldn't walk more than 500 steps without needing to sit down. He moved slowly. He couldn't go far. More importantly, Tikal was swarming with search teams within a half hour of his disappearance. If he had simply wandered off, wouldn't he have been found nearby? Dogs were brought in to track his scent, yet they found nothing, not even a faint trace. Authorities combed through 16 kilometers of terrain, yet not a single clue surfaced. Even if, against all odds, Raymond had somehow wandered deep into the jungle, the environment itself raises questions. If something had happened to him, heat exhaustion, an injury, or even an animal attack, there would be something left behind. a piece of clothing, his hat, his binoculars, a shoe. But there was nothing. Could it have been an animal attack? Tikal National Park is home to an array of wildlife, including jaguars, crocodiles, and even venomous snakes. Could Raymond have been attacked by an animal? Possibly. But the problem with this theory is the lack of evidence. Animal attacks are rarely clean. If a jaguar had taken Raymond, there would likely be signs of a struggle: blood, torn clothing, drag marks. If he had fallen victim to a crocodile in the pond, someone would have heard splashing and there would be some trace of an attack. Even scavengers leave remains. Yet in all the weeks of searching, not a single piece of evidence suggested an animal encounter. So this theory, while possible, doesn't really fit the facts. Given Raymond's history of memory issues and mental health struggles, could he have suffered a medical emergency? A sudden stroke, a seizure? Could he have collapsed somewhere out of sight and been overlooked? Again, this theory raises the same question: where is he? If Raymond had collapsed on a path, he would have been found quickly. The search teams scoured every possible location where he could have fallen. And even if, by some bizarre chance, he had fallen unconscious in a hidden area, the passage of time should have uncovered something. A piece of clothing, a belonging, just something. Yet again, nothing. Which means we have to look at foul play. That's the theory that keeps coming up. What if Raymond didn't disappear on his own? What if someone or something was responsible? There are a few reasons why this theory can't be dismissed. First, there's the timeline. Van and the group last saw Raymond at the pond, just steps from the entrance to the hotel. The walk back was short. He was moving slowly. In the span of fewer than 30 minutes, he was simply gone. Second, there's the complete lack of evidence. If Raymond had gotten lost, something should have been found. If he had suffered a medical event, his body should have been recovered. But if someone had taken him, that could explain the eerie absence of clues. Could Raymond have been targeted? The idea might seem far-fetched at first, but Tikal, while a popular tourist destination, isn't immune to crime. Guatemala in general has high rates of disappearances, kidnappings, and organized crime. Could someone have lured Raymond away? Or worse, could someone have taken him against his will? The theory raises a chilling question. If foul play was involved, why Raymond? He wasn't carrying anything valuable. He wasn't a high-profile target. He wasn't alone in a dangerous area. He was surrounded by people. Unless someone saw him as vulnerable. Could someone have watched him, noticed his slow movements, his fragile state, and seen an opportunity? Possibly. If this was an abduction, it was clean. There was no sign of struggle, no one reported seeing anything suspicious, and no demands for ransom ever came. So if someone took Raymond, we may never know the reason why. Could Raymond have intentionally walked away? It's not an entirely impossible theory. Some cases of disappearances involve people who, due to mental health struggles or cognitive decline, enter a state of confusion and unknowingly leave the area. Could that have happened here? Maybe. But if so, how? If Raymond had left the park, someone should have seen him. Authorities reviewed CCTV footage, border crossings were checked, Interpol got involved. No one saw Raymond leave. There was no indication he had planned to go anywhere. And he didn't have the physical ability to get far. And yet, he's gone. Years have passed. The jungle has been searched over and over. Investigators have combed through every lead, every piece of surveillance footage, every possible route. Nothing. Raymond Ashcroft, a man with limited mobility, a man who moved so slowly he couldn't go far, vanished into thin air in a matter of minutes, in broad daylight, just feet away from a hotel full of people. No clues, no witnesses, no explanation. Somewhere, somehow, there is an answer to what happened to Raymond Ashcroft. But until that answer is found, the question lingers. How does a man disappear without a trace? And more disturbingly, is someone out there who knows exactly what happened to him. Guatemala is a country of contrasts. It's breathtakingly beautiful, rich in history, and home to incredible natural wonders like towering volcanoes, lush rainforests, and ancient Mayan ruins. But it's also a country where danger can lurk in unexpected places. Tourists come here for adventure, to explore, to discover, to step off the beaten path. But what happens when stepping off that path leads to something sinister? Raymond and Van were experienced travelers. They weren't reckless. They weren't thrill seekers pushing the limits of danger. They were on a guided birdwatching tour, following a well-established itinerary, staying at a respected lodge inside one of the most famous national parks in the world. And yet, somehow, in broad daylight, surrounded by other people, Raymond vanished. His disappearance is a chilling reminder that even in a group, even in what seems like a controlled environment, things can go terribly wrong. So, let's talk about safety. Let's talk about the reality of traveling in Guatemala, in Tikal, in the jungle, and what you need to do to protect yourself, whether you're exploring ancient ruins or simply making your way from your hotel to a restaurant. Guatemala is one of the most visited countries in Central America, drawing in travelers with its stunning landscapes and deep cultural roots. But it also has one of the highest crime rates in the region. Petty theft is common, and violent crime, including kidnappings, does happen, especially in remote areas. Although, like I always say, there's crime in every corner of the world. So this doesn't mean you shouldn't visit. It doesn't mean you should be afraid, but it does mean that you need to be aware. You need to be prepared. When traveling in Guatemala, it's important to never assume that just because an area looks safe, it actually is. Pickpocketing is common in crowded areas, especially in major tourist spots like Antigua and Lake Atitlan. Armed robberies have been reported on public transportation, and in some cases, criminals pose as police officers to target tourists. Even in places that are considered relatively safe, things can go wrong. And that brings us to Tikal. Tikal is a place of immense beauty that attracts thousands of visitors every year. Walking through the ruins, you feel the weight of history, the echoes of the ancient Maya civilization that once ruled this land. But Tikal is also a vast, dense jungle, with much of it being isolated wilderness. For most visitors, the biggest risks at Tikal are things like heat exhaustion, dehydration, or slipping on the steep steps of a temple. But there are other dangers too. People have disappeared in this jungle before. Some are later found, injured or lost, but some, like Raymond, simply vanish. So what should you do if you plan to visit? Well, first, always stay with your group. Tikal is massive, and once you leave the main trails, it's incredibly easy to lose your sense of direction. The jungle can swallow you up quickly, and because the terrain is uneven and dense, it's difficult for search teams to cover ground effectively. Second, be aware of wildlife. Jaguars roam these forests, though they're rarely seen. But smaller dangers are everywhere. Poisonous snakes, aggressive insects, and even crocodiles near the park's waterways. If you're not paying attention, you could stumble into a dangerous situation without even realizing it. And finally, keep an eye on the time. The jungle gets dark fast, and if you lose daylight, finding your way back becomes significantly harder. Even experienced hikers have been known to misjudge their timing and find themselves stranded after nightfall. Many travelers feel safer when they book a trip through a reputable tour company, and in most cases, this is true. Being part of a tour reduces your risk of becoming a target for criminals, and it ensures that there are people around who can assist in an emergency. But as we've seen in Raymond's case, a tour group isn't a foolproof safeguard. He and Van were with a respected company. They had guides with them. They were following a planned route. And yet, in the brief span of minutes it took for him to step away from the group, he was gone. So what should you do if you're traveling with a group? First, get to know your guides and fellow travelers. Before heading into any remote areas, make sure you have a direct way to contact your guide in case of an emergency. Ask about the group's protocol if someone gets separated, because as we've seen, things can happen fast. Second, never assume that someone else is keeping track of you. In large groups, there's often a false sense of security. People assume that if something happens, someone else will notice. But that's not always the case. And if you find yourself lagging behind or feeling unwell, speak up immediately. And most importantly, set a meeting point. If you do become separated, know exactly where you should go to reconnect with the group. Cell service is unreliable in the jungle, so you need a backup plan that doesn't rely on technology. One of the most important lessons from Raymond's case is that traveling with medical or cognitive conditions requires extra precautions. Raymond suffered from memory issues and couldn't be left alone for extended periods. He also had trouble walking long distances, needing to rest frequently. Yet, in a moment of separation, he disappeared without a trace. If you or someone you're traveling with has cognitive impairments, mobility issues, or a mental health condition, here's what you need to do. Wear a medical ID or carry a medical card. This should include medical details in Spanish, or the predominant language of whatever country you're in case local authorities need to assist you. Use a GPS tracker. Small portable devices like a tile tracker or an Apple AirTag can be attached to clothing or backpack to help locate someone if they wander off. Stick to a routine. For travelers with dementia, anxiety, or neurological conditions, sudden changes in environment or routine can be disorienting. Try to structure your days in a predictable way. Always have a designated travel companion. Never assume that a tour guide or other tourists will look out for you the same way a trusted companion would. We know anything can happen, and the only defense is to be prepared. Stay aware, stay connected, make smart choices. Because when you're in an unfamiliar place, especially one as vast and unpredictable as the Guatemalan jungle, every decision matters. Sometimes the difference between coming home with incredible memories and never coming home at all is just a matter of paying attention. And remember, no matter where you're traveling, make sure you inform someone about your plans before going anywhere. Tell someone reliable where you're going, what you'll be doing, and when to expect you back. And my number one tip to staying alive on vacation is to pay attention to your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it isn't. Raymond Ashcroft wasn't an adventurer pushing the limits. He wasn't someone who took unnecessary risks. He was a husband, a man who had spent 40 years building a life with his wife. He was a retired pharmacist, a bird watcher, someone who found joy in quiet moments. And yet, despite all the precautions of traveling with a respected tour company, despite being surrounded by people, despite the fact that he could barely walk more than 500 steps without resting, he vanished. No clues, no answers, no trace. How does someone like Raymond simply disappear? That's the question that haunts this case. That's the question Van has had to live with every single day since February 3rd, 2023. She has searched for answers, but there are none. Authorities conducted extensive searches, used dogs, drones, and teams of trained professionals, but still nothing. Someone, somewhere, must know something. Maybe you were at Tikal National Park that day. Maybe you were staying at the Jungle Lodge and saw something that seemed insignificant at the time, but could now be a crucial piece of the puzzle. Maybe you took photos or videos near the hotel, near the pond, or along the trails. Images that might contain something in the background, something that could help. If you were in the area around February 3rd, 2023, or if you have any information that could help bring answers to Van and Raymond's family, please come forward. Even the smallest detail could make a difference. You can report tips to the Guatemalan authorities, the U.S. Embassy, or Interpol. Raymond is out there somewhere, and his family deserves answers. And finally, remember to leave a review and rate this podcast 5 stars if you like the show, or hell, even if you don't. But either way, feel free to let me know what you think. Please follow The Last Trip on Instagram at The Last Trip Crime Pod and subscribe on Patreon to support the show. You'll get extra research, videos, photos, and updates, and even learn more about my personal travels. That's patreon.com/The Last Trip Podcast. I'm Jamie Beebe, bringing you your last trip and signing off until the next one. Thanks for listening.